And we're back. Welcome back to Listen Up from What She Said Sports. So, our first episode was regarding Draymond Green and his revelation that some people have the perception following his repeated lack of control of his emotions on the basketball court, be it a game or practice, indefinite suspensions for sad behavior, people have begun to question if he physically abuses his wife, right? So that was the first episode. Well, since then, there's been a quote unquote skirmish on the basketball court during an actual game between the Detroit Pistons and the Minnesota Timberwolves. This game involved 12 technical fouls, two coaches, and five players were ejected. Now, a starting squad in basketball is five players. So if five players were ejected, imagine your starters all being ejected. And the conversation now is, was this skirmish good for basketball? In other words, is pushing and shoving and um, people getting ejected passion, which turns into anger and teammates rallying around their own, trying to protect. Is this good for basketball to see this competitiveness turn into passion, turn into anger, and people eventually get ejected? Some say yes because it makes the game exciting, because the ratings in basketball seem to be suffering. Men's basketball, women's basketball seems to be popular. But if you were already at the bottom, I mean, your upside is there, right? Whereas men's basketball has enjoyed success for a long time. But even in college, men's basketball kind of suffered a bit after the Caitlin Clark era at Iowa. So the question is, the skirmish or the melee good for basketball? Well, my question is, what do you tell Draymond Green, who was suspended indefinitely and had to undergo check ins, something similar to the type of check ins John Morant had to undergo after his conduct was found to be detrimental to the organization? Draymond at first seemed to push back and be upset that he had to attend these Zoom call check ins with a panel of about seven people, including his agent, the commissioner, and various people like the GM for the Warriors, etc. And about check in three, if Draymond was driving, they told him to pull over. But about check in three, he started to talk. He started to open up. Now, they had a series of check ins, maybe a dozen. And it was time for the check ins to end, right? Because this is temporary. This is to get you to a good place. Well, Draymond, it's reported he didn't want the check ins to end. But it said he also knew it couldn't replace his therapy that he already was involved in. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so the indefinite suspension is what has turned him around. And he's enjoying the check ins after being reluctant initially. And he has a therapist, but he's making progress on the check ins. And his reasoning for making the change is because he had a young daughter. Now, he already has two or three other children. So this is maybe his third or fourth child. But this particular birth is why he's different. He doesn't want the kids to see him like this because it has impacted them. I guess when they watch the games and they see him behave that way, that makes sense, right? So, Draymond's reaction to people saying that he needs to get help, he felt like he was being judged. When they assembled this panel of seven people, including his agent, the GM, the commissioner, for these check ins, he felt like he wanted to retire because he felt like he was being judged. Now, this doesn't sound like someone who is A, remorseful, B, willing to be different and grow. But somewhere around check in three, he wanted to open up. And then when the check ins were ready to wrap up, they thought he was in a good place. He wanted to continue, even though he has a therapist. So his therapist wasn't helping. His wife couldn't reach him. But seven people involved with the NBA who made it a mandatory, that he attend these Zoom call check ins. And even if he was driving when it was time for a check in, he needed to pull over. That's what got to him after three meetings. Sounds like consequences. Sounds like being called out and held accountable is what did it. So now let's go back to Jordan Poole. I mean, you would think after that incident, which was all over the news, that he surely wouldn't have wanted his children to know about that, right? And that his close relationship with his wife, she should have been able to reach him, right? And his therapist, the professionals that he sees, they should have been able to reach him, right? But no one did. But a panel of seven people on mandatory Zoom call check ins that he was reluctant to attend and participate in. But because he didn't want to be kicked out the NBA, he reluctantly went and then had a revelation at week three or the third check in. The skirmish that took place between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Detroit Pistons, while it wasn't bad for basketball, it's not needed to grow the game or increase the ratings. If the people who believe that this is good for basketball, it's exciting, it'll be good for the ratings, people will watch it now. I mean, the end is near if you have to drum up drama to, you know, keep people interested. I mean, it just signals you have a major problem if you think this is what will get the ratings to a better place. So while it's not bad for basketball because it's being sold as competitive individuals who are passionate about the game, um, in some instances, the passion can kind of turn into the physical aspect of the game. And then it from there, it can be misconstrued and turn into anger. And then that anger turns into a skirmish or a melee, etc. But no punches were thrown. So here's the thing. While it's not bad for basketball to see people compete and sometimes competition in a physical game can ratchet up a level, and there may be a little pushing and shoving, but 12 technical fouls? So here's the question. While it's not bad for basketball because it's a competitive physical sport, is it good for basketball that the handcuffs aren't too tight on the players? Or is that what the 12 technical fouls was about? Was that an overreaction or was it warranted? I believe the question and the conversation is happening because people understand that the commissioner wants to grow the league, but there have been complaints that the refs are too foul happy. The game is too soft. The physical aspect of the game in our modern time is way softer than in previous decades, that the game is almost not physical. And this is a reminder of what was. So, for long term, seasoned fans, this is what they're used to seeing. So, this is not a big deal. My question is, if you allow the physicality to result in a skirmish, how do you police Draymond if he's still back in the league? What do you tell him after his Zoom calls have ended? You tell him it's okay to show passion, it's okay to show anger, but it's not okay to push and shove or punch. Where do you draw the line to keep Draymond on the right side of things? Pushing and shoving is okay. Punching is not. That's where it seems to be after last night. But 12 people received technical fouls and 5 were ejected and no punches were thrown. So that's going to be the defining the defining action. Where do you draw the line? If Draymond is extreme to the right, what's considered extreme to the left? What's allowed? If Draymond isn't allowed, how do you keep what happened between the Pistons and the Timberwolves from turning into Draymond situation? And then, more importantly, how do you keep it from spilling over into the crowd, which is a repeat of Malice in the Palace? It started on the court, it was very physical, and then the crowd themselves injected themselves into the game. So while hockey is allowed to fight, baseball is allowed to clear the dugouts and come and protect teammates. That said, that's what happened last night, which is why it was so many people involved. Coaches came to protect players, players went to protect players, and no punches were thrown. So that's where you draw the line. Pushing and shoving, throwing everybody out, trying to break it up so that it doesn't spill over into the crowd. But we have to make sure that we spell out where the line is drawn so that the physicality combined with the competitiveness and the passion for the game, which can result in a skirmish, is seen totally different as to what is considered unsportsmanlike behavior. We have to clearly define what unsportsmanlike behavior looks like because for far too long, people have said that Draymond's behavior was allowed to linger. And on Threads, which is where the conversation happens, it was discussed that what Draymond was doing was okay because apparently Michael Jordan himself, the GOAT, had a physical altercation where he assaulted or punched Steve Kerr, who is now the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. And he was never ejected or suspended, etc. So the problem that the NBA has is it seems like they want or they don't mind the players getting into skirmishes, but they don't want the skirmishes to turn into physical brawls and fights. And they certainly don't want the brawls and fights to spill over into the fans, right? So where do you draw the line? Should it have been suspend Michael Jordan for punching Steve Kerr? I mean, we saw what happened, right, with Malice in the Palace. There were people whose careers were altered. But then look how long Draymond's been playing. And look at how many incidents of unsportsmanlike conduct. I mean, if he wasn't suspended indefinitely after punching Jordan Poole, I don't understand. And it seems that because he wasn't suspended after punching his own teammate, then he was around to stomp in the abdomen of another NBA player during a game. And then on in a chokehold with Rudy Gobert, and then on to punching another player. And that's when the league had enough. And he had an indefinite suspension. And that's when the 7 member panel was put together and he had mandatory Zoom call check-ins. Why wasn't that done before after Jordan Poole? Why was he given so much latitude? Is it the same reason there were no consequences for Michael Jordan to punch Steve Kerr in the face? Is it that players who are deemed to be good players are allowed to abuse others? That's a problem with the NBA. It's okay for the players to abuse each other, but definitely can't spill over to the fans? Or is it that it's okay for star players to get away with abusing others and it can't spill over into the fans? It just seems that the violence within the NBA, which is beyond the physicality of the game, has been allowed to happen, and it has something to do with star players, which leads and explains another issue that has probably begun to erode the popularity of the NBA, and that is surrounding star players, right? Draymond Green was a star player. He was good at what he did when he was at his pinnacle. And maybe his lack of control of his emotions is because he understands that his skill set is declining with age and that he gets frustrated when he can't keep up like he used to. It's possible. But then I don't know why the Michael Jordan Steve Kerr incident, you know, didn't have some type of suspension. Because what that says is if you're a star player, it's allowed. And I notice in the NBA, from being an avid fan, when star players don't perform well, the NBA coaches, and I think it's a league thing, they are slow to bench star players. They will allow a star player to perform horribly and lose, not just any game, but a playoff game. But if it's anybody else, they would have been benched. They are willing to lose games just to let the star player be on the court, even though the star player is performing horribly. So, what I believe has happened to the NBA is this treatment of star players allowing them to do whatever and not exhibiting consequences because they are the GOATs, because they're a star player, they're needed, their skill set, we need their 20 or 30 points a night, allowed to do whatever, bad behavior allowed to linger, misconduct detrimental to the team, or unsportsmanlike conduct allowed to linger. Think about Michael Jordan, Steve Kerr. Think about Dennis Rodman, how they had to go and get him out of a club or a casino or from somewhere to come play a game rather than suspend him for conduct detrimental to the team. Then we have Draymond Green, whose behavior has been allowed to linger. I heard the name Isaiah Stewart for Detroit involved in the skirmish, possibly was one of the instigators of the skirmish. I know I heard that name before. Something to do with LeBron during a Detroit or a different team that Isaiah Stewart was playing for. It could have been the Clippers. I don't know. It could have been Detroit. And then there was something with LeBron. And I think Isaiah Stewart believed that LeBron intentionally hit him. And I think it drew blood and it just turned into another quote unquote skirmish or melee. So the treatment of star players, allowing them to go unchecked with unsportsmanlike conduct or conduct detrimental to the team, allowing them to perform horribly and consistently poorly in a game to the detriment of the team, willing to lose games just so long as this person is out there on the court, not willing to sit or bench the star player and play someone else so that they can win. I think that's what's happening to the NBA. Fans have caught on. Oh, we're going to the game merely to be entertained because so and so isn't playing well and they aren't going to bench him. And they aren't going to start the rising star who's actually doing better because it's not the star player that they've invested in. I think that's what's happening to the NBA. And eventually, you get tired of going to the games and being entertained. Because what happens every year after All Star? The playoffs. And when your team consistently doesn't make it, and they don't make it because why? Your star player isn't doing well, and you refuse to bench your star player. So we can predict the outcome. That is what's happening to the NBA. All actions have consequences. And allowing star players to go unchecked, whether it's misconduct, detrimental to the team, or unsportsmanlike conduct, or poor performance resulting in losing games and continuously missing the playoffs, no personnel adjustments. That's what's happening. It's predictable. Oh, they aren't going to make the playoffs because their star player isn't playing good, and they refuse to bench him and let the rising stars play. That's where we are. So fighting is not the answer. Allowing players to fight is not the answer, because what you can't do is make sure and guarantee that some fan does not get involved. You can't guarantee that outcome, because if you could have, it would have never happened in Detroit with the Malice in the Palace. So maybe just play competitive basketball and let the best players play with the goal of actually winning. And then maybe fans will get interested. We don't come to see a show. We don't come to be purely entertained. We come to watch a competitive basketball game. Thank you for listening to What She Said Sports. Listen up. As always, please leave us your comments, your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to What She Said Sports.